So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this Friday Focus talk, and I'm really honored to be here. I actually completed my master's in museum studies from University of Glasgow in 2020. Yeah, yeah. So I'll always say an enthusiastic yes to any opportunity to work with the Hunterian. And just a quick note that unless I've noted it otherwise, I've taken all of the photographs while I've been on field work. So yeah. Oh goodness, sorry. Got two screens going, making sure you're not, yeah. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So remembering the Scottish witchcraft trials, I'll give a bit of a background of like who I am and what I do, and I'll give a history and context of the Scottish witchcraft trials. And then I'll talk about, when I talk about the work, I'll talk about what is this work, who's doing it. I'll talk about in the landscape. So I don't want to give too much away. And then I'll talk about what's next. Sorry, I'm going to try to slow down. I speak really quickly. So remembering the Scottish witchcraft trials. This is just a quick overview of my project and of anthropology, which I'm sure you all know this already, but social anthropology is the study of patterns of behavior in human societies and cultures. So my research, I'm a current PhD. I'm in my third year at University of Edinburgh, as Rachel said. So my research looks at how people in Scotland memorialize the witch trials that took place in the early modern period. So I started looking at this in my master's research in 2020, when I was just looking at the representations of witches and witchcraft in Scottish cultural heritage. And obviously, like as we all went into lockdown, this movement just started popping up around me. People started getting really interested in the witchcraft trials. And before I knew it, I was tracking a movement and doing a PhD. So when I started fieldwork over a year ago, I thought I would be mainly engaging with two different groups of people who are advocating for a national memorial to the accused, a pardon for the people who were accused, and an apology. And the apology was actually given on International Women's Day 20, oh gosh, it was either 2022 or 2021. I think it was 2021. Yes, 2021, by former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. So I thought I was going to be tracking these two different groups and this thing that they were doing. And the reality became much richer, and it happened on a much more like localized level. So just a bit of history and context on what it is the people that I work with are actually remembering. So in Scotland, this is mainly a background of the laws which led to these persecutions. Roughly about 4,000 people were persecuted. About 60% of the accused were executed, and about 85% were women. Yeah, and like I said, this is so that we understand what my participants are looking to remember and memorialize. On June 4th, 1563, the Protestant Parliament passed the Witchcraft Act, which established that both the practice of and consulting with witches was a capital offense. And this act was in effect until 1736, when a revised act made it a crime for a person to claim that another person had magical powers. So it went from accusing people of witchcraft to saying that you couldn't be a witch because practicing magic is a crime. So nuanced difference. But that law in 1736 effectively ended the hunting and execution of people as witches. So in 1591, News from Scotland was propaganda put out by King James I and the Sixth and his associates. Really, it was like fake news, right? If we want to think about what propaganda is. And News from Scotland claimed to give a true account of the trial of alleged witches in North Berwick. So that's where the witch trials in Scotland really began. The trial of supposed witchcraft began with the arrest of, she was 14 or 15 years old. She was a maid servant. Her name was Gaylis Duncan. And yes, the Outlander character, Diana Gabaldon, took inspiration from this real person, from Gaylis. I think someone has their hand up. If we could hold questions for the end, I think, is that what we want to do, Rachel? Awesome, cool. Pop them in the chat if you don't want to forget, right? Cool, sorry. So then in 1597, King James published a compendium on witchcraft lore called Demonology. You can still totally buy this book. It is full of King James's assertions to his full belief in magic and witchcraft, and aim to both prove the existence of these evil demonic forces, and also to lay down what sort of trial and punishment these practices would merit. And in his view, it was death. That was the only punishment for the crime of witchcraft. So actually many elements of witchcraft in the scenes about the Weird Sisters scenes in Macbeth, many of the elements in their scenes come from King James's beliefs and ideas about witchcraft. That includes things like vanishing, invisible flight, their raising of storms, their dancing and their chanting, their sexual acts, even their potion ingredients, and the presence of familiars come from demonology and King James's like ideas of what witchcraft was. So the trials in Scotland were so widespread that at some point, almost anywhere in Scotland, like someone somewhere would either accuse a neighbor or a family member of witchcraft or be that accused person. So that's our history and context, and I'm just gonna keep moving along. I definitely want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'm like, how am I doing on time? Good. Okay. So I'm going to move into what this work is and who's doing it. So the next several slides are going to be just a few of the projects and people that I spent my time with. They're authors, artists, including a comic book artist, local historians, passionate community members. And what I found in my research was that people are doing incredible ways of remembering and memorializing that aren't these traditional memorials in the landscape. And even when it is a memorial in a landscape, there's nothing really traditional about them. I've had the great privilege of traveling around Scotland for the last year and a half-ish, meeting with these incredible people and learning about their motivations for remembering the accused witches of Scotland. So for many of these people, it sprung from this feeling of kinship with the dead, a calling, something they would describe as a vocation, to a duty of care for these people who are their ancestors of blood or of place. Like a lot of my participants are actually Scottish. Obviously, I am not either. For some people, this work is deeply spiritual, and this connection and this kinship stemmed from their own practices as contemporary witches or spiritual practitioners in some capacity. And for other people, it's just a purely agnostic drive to see the wrongs of the past righted. So this work of remembering historic injustices has taken on many, many forms. So this first photo is from the book A Kind of Spark, which was written by Ellie McNichol. And it's a book about an 11-year-old girl with autism, and she lives in a fictitious Scottish village that's really, really similar to North Berwick. And she's advocating for a memorial to the accused in her village. And it's just a really, really, it's a super quick read, and it's so lovely. And P6 classes in North Berwick are actually using this book to learn about their own history. And they're also learning it to engage in discussions about disability and about gender and about discrimination. So it's just really, I wouldn't be surprised if we see kiddos in North Berwick spearheading the erection of a memorial there. So the next one is a memorial mural in Forfar, where two local historians are advocating for a plaque, like a plaque with names to commemorate the accused. This dynamic duo, because their rapport is absolutely incredible, and they're so intelligent. They give talks at the local museum in Forfar. They give talks within the local community. They do tours, and they assert that this plaque is going to do a different job in the landscape of the village than the memorial stone does. So I'll get to the memorial stone a little bit later, but there already is a memorial to the people that were accused in Forfar, but a plaque that names names and is on a building where things happened does a different job than a stone, memorial stone. according to my participants, which is super interesting. So this is from Outlander Night at the Museum. So some of you might have been there and seen the exhibition from Witches in Word, Not Deed, which is the project of Carolyn Sutton. She's just a phenomenal artist. And I have no shame in saying this is my favorite piece of memorial work. Carolyn has created 13 dresses for 13 accused women around Scotland, and she's made the fabric with words that were used against them, and then designed these dresses into a style of dress based on her research that the accused would have likely worn. So this is a literal and figurative moving memorial. I just think it's so powerful. It's currently on display at the Edinburgh Central Library until the 30th of November, all 13 of them, if anyone wants to see them. But I just think it's such a different kind of memorial, right? And as I said, it's movable. So it's in Edinburgh now. We were able to take just a few of them to Outlander Night at the Museum. She's going to have them on display in Inverness eventually. So this is really, really great. And obviously there's only 13 done. Well, there's 13 done in the scope for this project to just grow legs and become bigger than is incredible. This next one is a permanent display in the Abernethy Museum, and it was championed by Audrey Clark, who is awesome. So Audrey spent lockdown just walking the hills of Abernethy, right? Like she lives in this kind of, Abernethy's a little village. It's just surrounded by spectacular hills in Perth. And she just spent lockdown hill walking and getting super interested in her local history. I should also note that this is really indicative of a lot of my research participants. Is it's not just boom, we went into lockdown and this interest came out of nowhere. Most of them already are people who were just really, really interested in local history and stories. So for Audrey, she knows the entire history of the house that she lives in. So she just got really interested in this folklore and oral tradition in the village, that there were over 20 women accused of witchcraft and executed for it. She was able to find out after some pretty diligent research that there were 3. So with the museum trustees, she has been able to secure a location for a memorial stone to be built. And this exhibition panels a permanent display in the museum. I'll talk more about the memorial stone shortly. These next 2 photos are such a cool story, or I think they're such a cool story. So this photo is from the interior of the Kirk of Midcalder, and those panels are Caitlin Bannatyne's comic. I apologize for my American accent. None of them witches. I'm really sorry. I just destroyed that. So Caitlin, for her it was her undergrad thesis project, made a comic about the Scottish witch trials, and the Kirk of Midcalder has them on display along with some panels. And I'll show you in the second photo. There's some other really interesting stuff that the Kirk of Midcalder has on display inside the Kirk. This Kirk dates back to the 12th century. Like it has a history with King David I, I think it was. And the Kirk session records are super, super detailed. They date far back before 1643, but that was when Agnes Bishop became the first person in the area accused of witchcraft, and that's documented in the Kirk session records. The records also talk about a woman named Margaret Thompson, who was kept awake for 28 days, which Scotland was really proud of the fact that it didn't torture these people that were accused, but torture, what we know torture to be now versus what was considered torture at this time, is so keeping people awake. You hear about the witch pricking, looking for a witch's mark, shaving their bodies. There was stuff that wasn't considered torture at the time, but is absolutely torture. So she was kept awake for 28 days, but this is Margaret Thompson, she never confessed, which I just think is really incredible. And then she was eventually freed. Sadly, the records don't tell us what happened to her, but this is just a really interesting story of someone that was accused, went through a pretty horrific experience, but wasn't executed. So then this is the sanctuary of the Kirk. And so there's two folks in Calder, they're academics, Susan Jalanders and Mari Harkness. They learned about these accusations and they worked with the current Kirk elders on this exhibition, right, that's in the sanctuary. So you've got the comics on display out in the main area of the church, and then in the back sanctuary, there's huge panels describing the various women and the stories. There's representations of dress that they would have worn in the time. And so Susan and Mari worked with, I get super excited, so I hope I'm not like jumping around too much and I'm actually staying on track. Susan and Mari worked with the current Kirk elders to have a memorial stone placed into this sanctuary, a memorial stone to the accused. And as far as they know, I know, as we've all been able to find out, it's the only memorial to the people that were accused to go into a kirk. And what's so exciting, or I think compelling, about this situation is because these kirk records are so detailed all the way back to, you know, the beginning of the accusations until now. We've come full circle, right? The Kirk session records show the accusations, and then the Kirk session records also show that this memorial stone's been approved to be placed in the kirk. I just think that's really compelling. So the next two slides are going to be about books. This is Mary Craig's two books. There's another book in there as well, because this was at an event that she was speaking at. But Mary Craig has written a couple of books, one on Agnes Finney, who was a accused witch in Edinburgh, who was a bit of a jerk. And that's why Mary was inspired to tell her story, was because she read the trial records about her and read that she was really just an unpleasant person, which is super interesting because people are unpleasant. And that tells like the complicated like spectrum of human experience, right? Like people who were just people can be unpleasant, but they still are not diabolical witches who should be accused of something horrific and executed. And then her second book is on the Borders witch hunts, which is super interesting because the Borders had a really quite a lot of accusations. Actually, they probably, I shouldn't say that they saw more than anywhere else, but I think that that's pretty accurate. There's always too many numbers rolling around in my head. On the flip side of that, her current research is into the Gaeltacht and why, and the accusations that happened in the Gaeltacht, or the lack of. So for all of the accusations we see in the Borders, we don't see a lot of accusations in the Gaelic speaking regions of Scotland and in the Highlands. And she's gonna produce some really fascinating research on why that is. This next one is, I'm kind of proud of this photo because it is Alison Shaw's book, Ashes and Stones, at the Dundee Witches Memorial Stone. I just happened to be reading the book on the train when I went to Dundee, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool, because she actually writes about this stone in her book. Her book is, for all intents and purposes, a memorial. And it's a work of creative nonfiction. It's a heavily researched travel log memoir, researching places in the Scottish landscape that mark atrocities and femicide. So she went around Scotland and visited places that are either a dedicated memorial or just places that have a story associated, and like a place and a touchstone that's associated with the witchcraft trials. This photo might seem a little bit unexpected because it's just a really cool gravestone at the Logie Old Kirkyard in Bridge of Allan. But hear me out. This is what I think is so exciting for me about getting to do anthropology is Professor of Midwifery and Nursing Nicola Ring invited me to come hang out with her in Bridge of Allan. She's part of a project at Edinburgh Napier that's connecting the witchcraft trials to the history of midwifery and nursing. So she and her team are like simultaneously debunking the stereotype that most of these people who were accused were healers or even like real witches. She and her team have identified through all of the trial records and confessions, they have identified about, it's like over 130, close to 140 people out of the 4,000 who were undoubtedly community healers in some capacity. And her research is so fascinating. It's this connection between these healers of the early modern period. And I hope I have so much to say about it. I just want to just very quickly say that a lot of these people were accused and executed because they were in direct competition with the emerging medical profession. So you wouldn't want to accuse and execute your local midwife or your local healer, because that's literally the person in your community who's birthing the babies. Like, you wouldn't actually accuse these people. But what starts happening when surgery and medicine and men start practicing medicine, they see these women as in direct competition to their business. And so it becomes this really strategic getting people out of the way so that it can make room for modern medicine. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining that, but Nicola's project is super fascinating. And yeah, she invited me to Bridge of Allen, near where she stays, to have lunch and to walk around this really incredible kirkyard that dates to the 1380s. And supposedly some of these accused women used to dance in the kirkyard, unrelated to the accusations or not, who knows. But I just really love the experiences that I'm able to have that facilitate these conversations. So the next three little stories are about memorials in the landscape. So when I talk about in the landscape, these are physical, like I said, traditional, non-traditional memorials. So this one is in Peebles, which is a super lovely story. It was just two community members, Elisa and Simon, mobilized in their community to see a memorial erected on the Tweed Green to the people that were accused in their community. Elisa is a self-identifying pagan, and Simon is a social justice advocate and does not identify as a witch or a pagan or spiritual leaning. And he gave me one of my most favorite quotes, which is, he doesn't think that these people who were just, as they say, good borders folk, and they were Christian, he doesn't think that they could have been in league with the devil, because the devil doesn't exist, which I think is just a really neat way to think about these things. And so, yeah, they just mobilized in their community. They had an unveiling last October. There was over 100 people in attendance. It was pouring rain. It was really beautiful. And now it exists there. I'm going so quick, sorry. The next one is one that's in process, and this is the one in Abernethy. And so on the left is Audrey, and that's an artist's rendition of her as one of the accused. And the point of that exercise was to show that really the accused could have been anybody, looked like anybody. There wasn't anything special or extraordinary. They were just like normal people. Abernethy's really cool. It's got a really rich Pictish history. It's got a tower at Brecon and a Pictish stone dating from the 6th or 7th century. And so the memorial stone is going to be done in the style of a Pictish stone, so that it just kind of lives within the landscape. So yeah, the middle drawing is a like artist's rendition. It's not going to be exactly that. And then on the right is the stone artist in his workshop. Just that's the space. It's super exciting. It hopes to be unveiled this winter. And then this last one is a memorial. So I kind of went from like a newish memorial. I got to track the process of it, and then one that hasn't been built yet. And then this is one that's actually been in the landscape for several years. And this is the one in Forfar, and it's near the Forfar Loch. And this one's a little bit dear to me because I was able to speak to, so it was erected by Mark and Maria Cashley. They were just chiropractors in Forfar. And I was able to speak with Mark during my master's research. And he talked about how Maria, who actually passed away really shortly after this was erected, that Maria was just really moved by the stories of the people in their community who were accused of witchcraft, and they just wanted a little something in the landscape to acknowledge them. And it's just really beautiful. It's just got dots that represent all of the accused, and then it says just people. But you can see the way that a memorial exists in the landscape, right? And how people interact with it. You can see in the middle photo, like people leave stones, they leave coins, they leave little offerings around and on the stone. On the left, someone had a fire pit there, clearly like within the last, it had to have been within the last day or two before I got there, because the coals were really fresh. And then on the right, somebody's like graffitied a witch's broom. So what's next for this movement. I genuinely have no idea, and I'm only half kidding, but really there's just so much going on that it's hard to pinpoint like what's the one thing that's going to happen next. This is a survey from the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, which has a digitized map. It was put together by researchers at the University of Edinburgh, and you can literally search. It's like I put it there, 3,141 places of residences of named accused. It's being updated. I know that the Wikimedian in residence and his team is in the process of updating this. There was a pardon that was in process. There was a bill that was introduced at Scottish Parliament for a pardon. But Natalie Dawn, who's the MSP who championed it, was promoted to a minister. So the bill now needs a new sponsor. So it's not gone, but it's just sort of not influx, it's just sort of on hold. And then the conversation about the national memorial is still ongoing. It seems to be that next steps are the organization of a public consultation. But getting a national memorial is expensive. Identifying where it's going to go, etc. So it's these things, but so that's, again, like I said, when I began this isn't about a national memorial anymore, or my research isn't about a national memorial anymore, because there's so many things happening on a local level. So much literature, or like witchrature, as they're calling it, is coming out, and like witch lit. I just think it's so exciting that people are just learning more and more about this history.